अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाज़रीन। खैर मक़दम है आप सबका। वेलकम टू आवर सेशन टुडे। इंशाअल्लाह हम कुरान मजीद की 46वीं सूरत 46 सूरह अहक़ाफ़, इसका हम ज़मानी नुज़ूल और इस सूरह में क्या मज़ामीन आए थे, इसका तारीख़ी पस मंज़र हमने पढ़ा था। आज इंशाअल्लाह इसके पहले रुकू की 5 आयतें पढ़ लेते हैं। सबसे पहले इन आयतों की तिलावत कर लेंगे। अऊज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम। बिस्मिल्लाहिर्रहमानिर्रहीम। हामीम तंज़ीलुल किताबि मिनल्लाहिल अज़ीज़िल हकीम। मा ख़लक़नस समावाति वल अर्ज़ वमा बैनहुमा इल्ला बिल हक़्क़ि व अजलिम मुसम्मा। वल्लज़ीन कफ़रू अम्मा उन्ज़िरु मुअरिज़ून। قل أرأيتم ما تدعون من دون الله أروني ماذا خلقوا من الأرض أم لهم شرك في السماوات ائتوني بكتاب من قبل هذا أو أثارة من علم إن كنتم صادقين. ومن أضل ممن يدعو من دون الله من لا يستجيب له إلى يوم القيامة وهم عن دعائهم غافلون. صدق اللہ العظیم۔ یہ تھی آیت نمبر 1 to 5 اور رکو نمبر 1 کی۔ تو انشاءاللہ اس کا ٹرانسلیشن پڑھ لیں گے۔ اللہ کے نام سے جو رحمان و رحیم ہے۔ حامیم، اس کتاب کا نزول اللہ زبردست اور دانا کی طرف سے ہے۔ ہم نے زمین اور آسمانوں کو، ان ساری چیزوں کو جو ان کے درمیان ہیں، برحق اور ایک مدت خاص کے تعین کے ساتھ پیدا کیا ہے، مگر یہ کافر لوگ اس حقیقت سے منہ موڑے ہوئے ہیں جس سے ان کو خبردار کیا گیا ہے۔ اے نبی، ان سے کہو، کبھی تم نے آنکھیں کھول کر دیکھا بھی ہے کہ وہ ہستیاں ہیں کیا جنہیں تم خدا کو چھوڑ کر پکارتے ہو؟ مجھے دکھاؤ تو صحیح کہ زمین میں انہوں نے کیا پیدا کیا ہے، کیا آسمانوں کی تخلیق و تدبیر میں ان کا کیا حصہ ہے؟ اس سے پہلے آئی ہوئی کتاب یا علم کا کوئی بقیہ ان عقائد کے ثبوت میں تمہارے پاس ہو تو وہی لے کر آؤ اگر تم سچے ہو۔ آخر اس شخص سے زیادہ بہکا ہوا انسان اور کون ہوگا جو اللہ کو چھوڑ کر ان کو پکارے جو قیامت تک اس سے جواب نہیں دے سکتے، بلکہ اس سے بھی بے خبر ہیں کہ پکارنے والے ان کو پکار رہے ہیں۔ تو یہ تھا ترجمہ ان آیتوں کا۔ اس کی تفسیر میں جانے سے قبل ہم تھوڑا سا ریکیپ کر لیتے ہیں کہ ہم نے اس کے جو زمانے نزول یعنی پس منظر میں جو پڑھا تھا کہ اللہ رب العزت نے یہ اس وقت نازل کی تھی سورت جب نبی اکرم صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم طائف سے واپس مکے کی طرف آ رہے تھے، نخلا کے مقام پہ آپ مقام کیے ہوئے تھے۔ یہ تو تاریخی پس منظر تھا، اور اس وقت کے حالات یہ تھے کہ یہ لوگوں کے جو کفار و مشرکین تھے قریش کے، جو شبہات تھے قرآن مجید کے تعلق سے، اللہ کے کلام کے تعلق سے، کہ محمد صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم یہ خود سے گھڑ لائے ہیں یا کسی اور سے سیکھ کے آتے ہیں، اس طرح کے جو الزامات لگاتے ہیں، تو اللہ تعالیٰ نے اس سورے کے اندر اس کے مدلل جوابات دیے ہیں۔ یعنی ان جو اعتراضات یہ لوگ کرتے تھے، اللہ تعالیٰ نے اس کو بتایا ہے کہ یہ جو کر رہے ہو تم بے وقوفی کی باتیں، اس کا اللہ تعالیٰ نے یہاں پہ جواب دیا ہے۔ تو انشاءاللہ اس کی تفسیر پڑھ لیتے ہیں تاکہ اس چیز کو ہم معلوم کر سکیں۔ حامیم، اس کتاب کا نزول اللہ زبردست اور دانا کی طرف سے ہے، یعنی کہ اس کی تمہید میں ہی اللہ تعالیٰ نے سورہ سجدہ میں بھی اس طرح کی بات کی تھی، سورہ زمر میں بھی، سورہ جاشیہ میں بھی، کہ سورہ کی تمہید یا اس کو روح کو سمجھنے کے لیے اللہ تعالیٰ نے اس سورہ کا آغاز ہی اس طرح سے کیا ہے۔ ہم نے زمین اور آسمانوں کو، ان ساری چیزوں کو جو ان کے درمیان ہیں، برحق اور ایک مدت خاص کے تعین کے ساتھ پیدا کیا ہے، مگر یہ کافر لوگ اس حقیقت سے منہ موڑے ہوئے ہیں جس سے ان کو خبردار کیا گیا ہے۔ یعنی واقع حقیقت تو یہ ہے کہ یہ نظام کائنات ایک بے مقصد کھلونا نہیں، بلکہ ایک با مقصد حکیمانہ نظام ہے جس میں لازماً نیک و بد اور ظالم و مظلوم کا فیصلہ انصاف کے ساتھ ہونا ہے، اور کائنات کا موجودہ نظام دائمی و ابدی نہیں ہے بلکہ اس کی ایک خاص عمر مقرر ہے۔ جس کے خاتمے پر اسے لازماً درہم برہم ہو جانا ہے، اور خدا کی عدالت کے لیے بھی ایک وقت طے شدہ ہے جس کے آنے پر وہ ضرور قائم ہونی ہے۔ لیکن جن لوگوں نے خدا کے رسول اور اس کی کتاب کو ماننے سے انکار کر دیا ہے، وہ ان حقائق سے منہ موڑے ہوئے ہیں۔ انہیں اس بات کی کچھ فکر نہیں ہے کہ ایک وقت ایسا آنے والا ہے جب انہیں اپنے اعمال کی جواب دہی کرنی ہوگی۔ وہ سمجھتے ہیں کہ ان حقیقتوں سے خبردار کر کے خدا کے رسول نے ان کے ساتھ کوئی برائی کی ہے، حالانکہ یہ ان کے ساتھ بہت بڑی بھلائی ہے کہ اس نے محاسبے اور باس پرس کا وقت آنے سے پہلے ان کو نہ صرف یہ بتا دیا کہ وہ وقت آنے والا ہے، بلکہ یہ بھی ساتھ ساتھ بتا دیا کہ اس وقت ان سے کن امور کی باس پرس ہوگی تاکہ وہ اس کے لیے تیاری کر سکیں۔ آگے کی تقریر سمجھنے کے لیے یہ بات ذہن میں رہنی چاہیے کہ انسان کی سب سے بڑی بنیادی غلطی وہ ہے جو وہ خدا کے متعلق اپنے عقیدے کے تعین میں کرتا ہے۔ اس معاملے میں سہل انکاری سے کام لے کر کسی گہرے اور سنجیدہ فکر و تحقیق کے بغیر ایک سرسری یا سنا یا عقیدہ بنا لینا ایسی عظیم حماقت ہے جو دنیا کی زندگی میں انسان کے پورے رویے کو اور ابدالآباد تک کے لیے اس کے انجام کو خراب کر کے رکھ دیتی ہے۔ لیکن جس وجہ سے آدمی اس خطرناک سہل انگاری میں مبتلا ہو جاتا ہے وہ یہ ہے کہ وہ اپنے آپ کو غیر ذمہ دار اور غیر جواب دہ سمجھ لیتا ہے، اور اس غلط فہمی میں پڑ جاتا ہے کہ خدا کے بارے میں جو عقیدہ بھی میں اختیار کر لوں اس سے کچھ فرق نہیں پڑتا، کیونکہ یا تو مرنے کے بعد سرے سے کوئی زندگی نہیں ہے جس میں مجھے کسی باس پرس سے سابقہ پیش آئے، یا اگر ایسی کوئی زندگی ہو اور وہاں باس پرس بھی ہو تو جن ہستیوں کا دامن میں نے تھام رکھا ہے وہ مجھے انجام بد سے بچا لیں گی۔ یہی احساس ذمہ داری کا فقدان آدمی کو مذہبی عقیدے کے انتخاب میں غیر سنجیدہ بنا دیتا ہے، اور اسی بنا پر وہ بڑی بے فکری کے ساتھ دہریت سے لے کر شرک کی انتہائی نامعقول صورتوں تک طرح طرح کے لغو عقیدے خود گھڑتا ہے یا دوسروں کے گھڑے ہوئے عقیدے اسے قبول کر لیتا ہے۔ اے نبی صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم، ان سے کہو، کبھی تم نے آنکھیں کھول کر دیکھا بھی ہے کہ وہ ہستیاں ہیں کیا جنہیں تم خدا کو چھوڑ کر پکارتے ہو؟ ذرا مجھے دکھاؤ تو صحیح کہ زمین میں انہوں نے کیا پیدا کیا ہے، یا آسمانوں کی تخلیق و تدبیر میں ان کا کیا حصہ ہے؟ اس سے پہلے آئی ہوئی کتاب یا علم کا کوئی بقیہ ان عقائد کے ثبوت میں تمہارے پاس ہو تو وہی لے کر آؤ اگر تم سچے ہو۔ چونکہ مخاطب ایک مشرک قوم کے لوگ ہیں، اس لیے ان کو یہ بتایا جا رہا ہے کہ یہ احساس ذمہ داری کے فقدان کی وجہ سے وہ کس طرح بے سوچے سمجھے ایک نہایت غیر معقول عقیدے سے چمٹے ہوئے ہیں۔ وہ اللہ تعالیٰ کو خالق کائنات ماننے کے ساتھ بہت سی دوسری ہستیوں کو معبود بنائے ہوئے تھے، ان سے دعائیں مانگتے تھے، ان کو اپنا حاجت روا اور مشکل کشا سمجھتے تھے، ان کے آگے ماتھے رگڑتے اور نظر و نیاز پیش کرتے تھے، اور یہ خیال کرتے تھے کہ ہماری قسمتیں بنانے اور بگاڑنے کے اختیارات انہیں حاصل ہیں۔ انہی ہستیوں کے متعلق ان سے پوچھا جا رہا ہے کہ انہیں آخر کس بنیاد پر تم نے اپنا معبود مان رکھا ہے۔ ظاہر بات ہے کہ اللہ تعالیٰ کے ساتھ کسی کو معبودیت میں حصے دار قرار دینے کے لیے دو ہی بنیادیں ہو سکتی ہیں، یا تو آدمی کو خود کسی ذریعے علم سے یہ معلوم ہو کہ زمین و آسمان کے بنانے میں واقع اس کا بھی کوئی حصہ ہے، یا اللہ تعالیٰ نے آپ سے یہ فرمایا ہو کہ فلاں صاحب بھی خدائی کے کام میں میرے شریک ہیں۔ اب اگر کوئی مشرک نہ یہ دعویٰ کر سکتا ہو کہ اسے اپنے معبودوں کے شریک خدا ہونے کا براہ راست علم حاصل ہے، اور نہ خدا کی طرف سے آئی ہوئی کسی کتاب میں یہ دکھا سکے کہ خدا نے خود کسی کو اپنا شریک قرار دیا ہے، تو لامحالہ اس کا عقیدہ قطعی بے بنیاد ہی ہوگا۔ اس آیت میں پہلے آئی ہوئی کتاب سے مراد کوئی ایسی کتاب ہے جو قرآن سے پہلے اللہ تعالیٰ کی طرف سے بھیجی گئی ہو، اور علم کے بقیہ سے مراد قدیم زمانے کے انبیاء اور صلحاء کی تعلیمات کو کوئی ایسا حصہ ہے جو بعد کی نسلوں کو کسی قابل اعتماد ذریعے سے پہنچا ہو، اور دونوں ذرائع سے جو کچھ بھی انسان کو ملا ہے اس میں کہیں شرک کا شائبہ تک موجود نہیں۔ تمام کتب آسمانی بالاتفاق وہی توحید پیش کرتی ہیں جس کی طرف قرآن دعوت دے رہا ہے، اور علوم اولین کے جتنے نقوش بھی بچے کچے موجود ہیں ان میں بھی کہیں اس امر کی شہادت نہیں ملتی کہ کسی نبی یا ولی یا مرد صالح نے کبھی لوگوں کو خدا کے سوا کسی اور کی بندگی و عبادت کرنے کی تعلیم دی ہو، بلکہ اگر کتاب سے مراد کتاب الہی اور بقیہ علم سے مراد انبیاء و صلحاء کا چھوڑا ہوا علم نہ بھی لیا جائے تو دنیا کی کسی علمی کتاب اور دینی یا دنیوی علوم کے کسی ماہر کی تحقیقات میں بھی آج تک اس امر کی نشاندہی نہیں کی گئی ہے کہ زمین یا آسمان کی فلاں چیز کو خدا کے سوا فلاں بزرگ یا دیوتا نے پیدا کیا، یا انسان جن نعمتوں سے اس کائنات میں متمتع ہو رہا ہے ان میں سے فلاں نعمت خدا کے بجائے فلاں معبود کی آفریدہ ہیں۔ آخر اس شخص سے زیادہ بہکا ہوا انسان اور کون ہوگا جو اللہ کو چھوڑ کر ان کو پکارے جو قیامت تک اسے جواب نہیں دے سکتے۔ جواب دینے سے مراد جوابی کارروائی کرنا ہے، نہ کہ الفاظ میں بآواز جواب دینا یا تحریر کی شکل میں لکھ کر بھیج دینا۔ مطلب یہ ہے کہ کوئی شخص اگر ان معبودوں سے فریاد یا استغاثہ کرے، ان سے کوئی دعا مانگے، تو چونکہ ان کے ہاتھ میں کوئی طاقت اور کوئی اختیار نہیں ہے، اس لیے وہ اس کی درخواست پر کوئی کارروائی نفی یا اثبات کی شکل میں نہیں کر سکتے۔ قیامت تک جواب نہ دے سکنے کا مطلب یہ ہے کہ جب تک یہ دنیا باقی ہے اس وقت تک تو معاملہ صرف اسی حد پر رہے گا کہ ان کی دعاؤں کا کوئی جواب ان کی طرف سے نہ ملے گا، لیکن جب قیامت آ جائے گی تو اس سے آگے بڑھ کر معاملہ یہ پیش آئے گا کہ وہ معبود اپنے ان عابدوں کے الٹے دشمن ہوں گے، جیسا کہ آگے کی آیت میں آ رہا ہے، بلکہ اس سے بھی بے خبر ہیں کہ پکارنے والے ان کو پکار رہے ہیں، یعنی ان تک ان پکارنے والوں کی پکار سرے سے پہنچتی ہی نہیں، نہ وہ خود اپنے کانوں سے اس کو سنتے ہیں، نہ کسی ذریعے سے ان تک یہ اطلاع پہنچتی ہے کہ دنیا میں کوئی انہیں پکار رہا ہے۔ اس ارشاد الہی کو تفصیل یوں سمجھیے کہ دنیا بھر کے مشرکین خدا کے سوا جن ہستیوں سے دعائیں مانگتے رہے ہیں وہ 3 اقسام پر منقسم ہیں۔ ایک بے روح اور بے عقل مخلوقات، دوسرے وہ بزرگ انسان جو گزر چکے ہیں، تیسرے وہ گمراہ انسان جو خود بگڑے ہوئے تھے اور دوسروں کو بگاڑ کر دنیا سے رخصت ہوئے۔ پہلی قسم کے معبودوں کا تو اپنے عابدوں کی دعاؤں سے بے خبر رہنا ظاہر ہی ہے۔ رہے دوسری قسم کے معبود جو اللہ کے مقرب انسان تھے، تو ان کے بے خبر رہنے کے 2 وجوہ ہیں۔ ایک یہ کہ وہ اللہ کے ہاں اس عالم میں ہیں جہاں انسانی آوازیں راہ راست تک نہیں پہنچتی۔ دوسرا یہ کہ اللہ اور اس کے فرشتے بھی ان تک یہ اطلاع نہیں پہنچاتے کہ جن لوگوں کو آپ ساری عمر اللہ سے دعا مانگنا سکھاتے رہے تھے، اب الٹی آپ سے دعائیں مانگ رہے ہیں، اس لیے کہ اس اطلاع سے بڑھ کر ان کو صدمہ پہنچانے والی کوئی چیز نہیں ہو سکتی، اور اللہ اپنے ان نیک بندوں کی ارواح کو اذیت دینا ہرگز پسند نہیں کرتا۔ اس کے بعد تیسرے قسم کے معبودوں کے معاملے میں غور کیجیے تو معلوم ہوگا کہ ان کے بے خبر رہنے کی بھی 2 ہی وجوہ ہیں۔ ایک یہ کہ وہ ملزموں کی حیثیت سے اللہ کے ہاں حوالات میں بند ہیں جہاں دنیا کی کوئی آواز انہیں نہیں پہنچتی۔ دوسرا یہ کہ اللہ تعالیٰ اور اس کے فرشتے بھی انہیں یہ اطلاع نہیں پہنچاتے کہ تمہارا مشن دنیا میں خوب کامیاب ہو رہا ہے اور لوگ تمہارے پیچھے تمہیں معبود بنائے بیٹھے، اس لیے کہ یہ خبریں ان کے لیے مسرت کی موجب ہوں گی اور خدا ان ظالموں کو ہرگز خوش نہیں کرنا چاہتا۔ اس سلسلے میں یہ بات بھی سمجھ لینی چاہیے کہ اللہ تعالیٰ اپنے نیک بندوں کو دنیا والوں کے سلام اور ان کی دعائیں رحمت پہنچا دیتا ہے، کیونکہ یہ چیزیں ان کے لیے فرحت کے موجب ہیں، اور اسی طرح وہ مجرموں کو دنیا والوں کی لعنت اور پھٹکار اور زجر و توبیخ سے مطلع فرما دیتا ہے، جیسے جنگ بدر میں مارے جانے والے کفار کو ایک حدیث کے مطابق نبی صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم کی توبیخ سنوا دی گئی، کیونکہ یہ ان کے لیے اذیت کے موجب ہے، لیکن کوئی ایسی بات جو صالحین کے لیے رنج کی موجب یا مجرمین کے لیے فرحت کی موجب ہو وہ ان تک نہیں پہنچائی جاتی۔ اس تشریح سے تمام ہوتا کہ مسئلے کی حقیقت بخوبی واضح ہو جاتی ہے۔ تو یہ تھی آج کے ان 5 آیتوں کی تفسیر۔ تو انشاءاللہ اس رکوع کو ہم کنٹینیو کرتے ہیں کل کے ہمارے سیشن میں۔ جزاک اللہ خیر۔
جزاک اللہ خیر نظام بھائی، بہت بہت شکریہ۔ کیسے ہیں آپ؟ ٹھیک ٹھاک ہیں؟
جی الحمدللہ
الحمدللہ۔ چلیں ایک اور ویکینڈ آ گیا تو ویکینڈ انجوائے کریں تھوڑا۔
بالکل ماشاءاللہ، کافی اب تو لاک ڈاؤن میں پھر بال بنانا مشکل ہو جائے گا۔
یہی حالات لگ رہے ہیں کہ اب دوبارہ سے جو ہے وہ پھر سے سب کچھ جو ہے وہ لمبے عرصے کے لیے یہی چلے گا۔ بالکل بالکل۔ چلیں انشاءاللہ پھر کل ملاقات ہوتی ہے
انشاءاللہ۔ السلام علیکم۔
وعلیکم السلام۔ السلام علیکم ورحمۃ اللہ وبرکاتہ۔ We'll quickly review last week's program for 5-10 minutes and then we'll inshallah kick off the new one from today. So do watch the video from last week for 5-6 minutes and then we'll inshallah start off with the new one today as well. 2020. And slowly but surely we are moving towards the end of 2020. Another quite a different year, as we've been discussing for quite some time now, of how this year has been nothing like before, and probably something that we will have nothing like ever after. Obviously, the big major story that's hitting every single platform globally, it's hitting anywhere and everywhere, is obviously around coronavirus and how coronavirus has impacted the lives, it has impacted the way we work, it has impacted every single element that we have across within our society in some way or form, whether it's the social healthcare system, whether it's the working of people virtually, or if it is down to the hospitality of restaurants, any other segment that you can pick on has obviously been highly and badly impacted by this coronavirus situation. And hence, I think some of the more recent news items that are obviously coming out on the back of it is something many of you might have seen reported a bit earlier today, that even within UK, where the tiering system was introduced, tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 around coronavirus lockdown, there are still localized restrictions that many of the governments, like in Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, can announce. We all know that Northern Ireland has gone into a proper lockdown. I think they're calling it a 2-week circuit breaker, just to bring the number of cases down. And as you can see, Wales has also announced that anyone visiting from coronavirus hotspot within England or Scotland won't be able to enter Wales anymore. So any place that is either on tier 2 or tier 3 within England or Scotland, anyone traveling from there won't be able to go into Wales or have any kind of vacation planned or any activity on the back of it. And it's really important in that sense that midterm is coming into UK, where the schools will be off, children will be off for a while again. And many might have been planning to travel into Wales for holidays and everything else in that domain. So that again won't be happening anytime soon. Moving beyond obviously the coronavirus impact, this October-November timing is obviously always very much the timing of elections in many countries. And one key election battle that is happening in this year, actually people are going to the voting booths on Saturday, is the election in New Zealand. And many of you might have been well aware of Jacinda Ardern, who's been the Prime Minister for the last 3 years in New Zealand. And she's a very, very popular Prime Minister of New Zealand because of her handling of the Christchurch situation. She was obviously the only second Prime Minister in any country globally who had a baby while she was in the office with her husband, who's a TV star. After Benazir Bhutto. Benazir Bhutto was the first Prime Minister in office to have a young baby born during her premiership. But she obviously been very famous in taking her baby across in UN and on the campaign rally. But obviously her popularity really hit the global levels when she tackled the Christchurch attacks on the mosques back in 2018, where 51 people were killed and martyred by a white supremacist who was jailed for life just a few weeks earlier in the courts in New Zealand. And her leadership, her reaching out to the community of Muslim descendants and Muslim background, really put her on the global map. And I think there have been more recent challenges that the government in New Zealand has been facing. A big volcano went burst, and then obviously coronavirus struck New Zealand earlier this year, when New Zealand being reported as one of the first countries that went into a lockdown. And technically, Jacinda Ardern announced that they have defeated coronavirus with no virus cases coming in for quite a while. So it will be an interesting election, as obviously she is expected to win quite easily, but you never know in any elections. I think that's one of the things about elections. You can never say who's actually going to win. Wa alaikum assalam. Idris Saab is online, I can say. Jazakallah khair for watching, and Muhammad Arif Chauhan Saab, I can see he's online as well. Jazakallah khair for watching, and hope Hope every one of you is doing well. I think over on the other side, more obviously closer to Europe, has been a very interesting story about the president of France, the ex-president of France, Nicolas Sarkozy, was actually being charged with criminal conspiracy. And people from Asian backgrounds might be well aware of prime ministers and presidents getting charged with different cases of conspiracy and corruption. But this is quite a big story in France, that the ex-president has been actually charged with criminal conspiracy on the back of the issue that he actually took cash from Libyan regime, Gaddafi and other people back in 2007 to fund his presidential campaign. So this is a big story in essence, that he was ex-president of France, and he's been charged as a member of a criminal conspiracy, as it's been called, that he has been taking a lot of bribes and cash from Libyan regimes and Libyan people in general back in 2007 to fund his election campaign. So this is going to be quite an interesting, in essence, issue for quite a while, to see if France actually really goes out, charges the president, and gives some sort of a punishment on the back of it as well. So this is quite a big story in France happening at the moment, and people are quite concerned on where and which shape it takes on, and what the end result of this might be. In Asia, over in Thailand, I think there's quite a major protest movement happening at the moment, as many of you might have been following these stories coming out from Thailand as well, that there are major protests happening against the government or the current monarchy in Thailand, and people are demanding that there should be elections happening in Thailand, and democracy should be further strengthened in the country. So there are major protests happening, and although government banned on the protest, they've been tackling with the protests with water cannons and all the police tactics that are used to steer away crowds. But the protesters are still not going away, and there's a major battle on the streets of Bangkok at the moment happening, where the government and the police is trying to get people away from protesting with water cannons and everything else. But as you can see on your screens as well, that they are actively using umbrellas and all that sort of stuff to fight against the water cannons and still continue with their protest. So this is again quite a major protest movement happening in Thailand at the moment, and people are expected to increase in numbers and increase in the protests over the coming weeks as well, which is going to create a bit of a interesting view of how things happen and go forward from here at this point onwards. Over far east in Japan, I think quite an interesting element is happening at the moment. Many of you might have remembered the tsunami that took over back in 2007, I think, and it was 2007-8 time period, and it was a massive destruction that happened in places like in Japan, in Sri Lanka, in some of the Pacific Islands, and all the areas in that domain after the earthquake. And one of the major things affected by tsunami was the nuclear power plant in Japan, in Fukushima. As many of you might remember, the nuclear disaster that happened in Fukushima. So what Japan has been doing is that everything that was done to cater the radioactivity from that nuclear plant, that water has been stored in some storage tanks since then. And now the capacity is running out. So Japan is going to be releasing all that radioactive treating water back into the sea. So this is quite a controversial issue at the moment. Many people are saying that it is going to happen, and it is going to create a major impact on the sea and the fishing and all the other things, as you would imagine, all the other things that are included within that ocean ecosystem. But Japan and some of the scientists are saying that releasing that water that basically treated the nuclear disaster is not going to create a massive impact. So releasing that water into the sea is hopefully not going to create too many issues for the life and the ecosystem of fishes and everything else in that domain. Walaikum Assalam. Rizwan Akbar Sahab is watching. Jazakallah khair as well. So let's see how this thing shapes up. One of the, I think, the saddest stories that obviously happened earlier this year was the attack in Afghanistan on the maternity hospital. As many of you might remember, that there was an attack on a maternity hospital, and many new mothers and children who were literally born on the day were pretty much martyred in this attack. But obviously, good things often happen, and there was this Amina who was only 1 hour old when the attack happened, and you can see her on the screens as well. And she was quite badly injured in that attack, but now she is recovering. I think she is getting back on her feet. She is about 7 months old now, and obviously it was a sad day for Amina. She lost her mom as well, and the father, as you can see on the screen as well. But she was the youngest person ever recorded to have been shot by a gunfire battle of this record. She was only 2 hours old at that time, but now she is recovering, and she is hopefully soon, inshallah, going to be starting walking again as well. So it's been reported globally, and she's obviously seen as a symbol of recovery of Afghanistan in some manner as well, and the resilience of the country and the people in Afghanistan. That she was only 1.5 hours old and still got shot, but still recovering, and inshallah she'll be back soon on her feet and walking properly in the future as well. More, I think one of the major things happening in Middle East is obviously many of you might have been following this war that has been breaking out in Yemen for quite a while between the Houthis and the government and what are known as the Houthi rebels in there. But things seems to be improving finally in Yemen as well. There was a recent agreement signed between the rebels and the government forces in Switzerland and in Stockholm, actually. And on the back of this agreement and the peace treaty that was signed, there has been a swapping and releasing a number of prisoners of war for quite some time. More than 400 prisoners have been released by both sides as a sign that things are hopefully going to improve in Yemen, finally, after years of fighting. And both sides are going to be coming to the table to speak to each other, and then hopefully see a lot of normality returning back to Yemen at some point as well. So you can see on your screen the prisoners that have been on each side for quite a long time now. They've been started to be released now, and United Nations, the ICRC, the International Committee of Red Cross, and some of the other people are expecting that up to 700 people will be freed during this operation of prisoner swapping. And hopefully, inshallah, things start to improve and slightly get back to normality in Yemen at some point as well. So this is, again, Walaikum Salam, Rana Sarfraz Sahab is watching as well. Jazakallah khair for watching. So we hope that with this prisoner swapping and people coming back and speaking on different elements of how things can be brought back to some degree of normality, that we see things as improving in Yemen as well. I think on the across the pond in United States, obviously elections is the biggest topic at the moment. And interestingly, the pre-polls have already started in United States. Obviously, 3rd November is the actual voting date for the presidential election, but in many areas it is always staggered in US. There isn't like just one day of elections as such. They start elections with pre-polling in some states and areas so that it can be eased out, and then it can be completed by 3rd of November as the final polls, and then the result comes out on the 4th of November. But this time around, it is so far seen that it's been highly concentrated in terms of people turning out to vote. It's never been seen previously. The number of voters in the line, the people who have really started to come out, this has never been seen before, as been reported by different news agencies, that the people who are coming out to vote are really in their long queues. There are hundreds and hundreds of people. You can already see this queue that's actually out in in Florida area. So many people have already started to queue for very long time and long hours, even before the poll started, to cast their early ballots within the US election. So this is going to be a really, really interesting election, as many of you might be well aware of it, with Donald Trump and Joe Biden standing against each other. But with this level of voter turnout, the expectation is that it is going to be a very close call on who actually wins the election at the end of the day. It's probably going to be on the knife edge. And as ever in the US elections, the swing states, or the states with the highest electoral votes, Florida and some of the other ones, are going to play a critical role on who actually wins at the end of the day. So this again is an ongoing thing. It's going to be obviously interesting in how to see where it goes on from here. More closer to home, and this is something I think this is becoming a much more a reality of times that we live in, that the technology that secures our data, and while we are using WhatsApp and Facebook and Instagram and everything else in that domain, whenever any organization or corporation loses sight on the security of the data, it's becoming a major issue. British Airways today were fined 20 million over leakage of data from their systems. The Information Commissioner's Office, ICO, they said that it was back in 2018 that personal data of so many of British Airways clients and flyers was actually released online, and many people were exposed with all their data available to hackers and all that sort of stuff. So ICO has actually fined 20 million, which is the single largest fine ever conducted because of a data breach. So it's a very strong reminder of any organization that records or maintains data of anyone individually, that this is going to become a major issue globally, not just in UK, but globally the fines are going to be massive. So any organization, charities, or any other form of firm which stores people's data is going to become a lot more in the spotlight. And I think the last bit, in a way, just on a very high level, is obviously one of the big things happening last week was Apple released its iPhone 12, which is the latest in the iPhone release. And as many of you are well aware, that iPhone is one of the top-selling smartphone brands in the world, probably if not the topmost brand in the world. But this time, this Apple iPhone 12 has a very unique chip that's been developed and embedded into it. And this chip that is generated by a machine that costs around 100 million, 123 million, is one of the first chips in the world that will enable people to have literally the capacity of a whole data room into their mobile phones. So it will be something that will allow people to edit video clips, play games in a more graphically intensive oriented manner, while using very less on the battery power, because Apple has been always been very bad on the battery life of the Apple iPhones. So this new chip, it's probably going to redefine in some way or form how mobile phones are built over the number of years. And this is going to be quite interesting on how the other organization and mobile phone brands start using this new chip that is going to make smartphones a bit more faster, a bit more lighter and longer in their battery lives as well, as because the chip is going to be using UV light to create all the data on the plasma in the way it stores. So this A14 chip is this A14 Bionic chip that's been kind of integrated into the Apple 12 phones is certainly going to be something really different for the smartphones technology that we have been pretty much using for the last many years. So this again, I think, was quite a new thing that was introduced by Apple quite recently. So that was kind of a bit of an overview of a few things that are happening around the world, in Yemen, New Zealand, United States, Middle East, in Afghanistan, in obviously United States election orientation, in UK around coronavirus and all the situations. Hopefully, we, inshallah, continue with these discussions in the coming weeks. And as we hear more about updates as we go through more weeks, we'll, inshallah, keep sharing them as well. So, jazakallah khair for watching. and we'll inshallah continue with this from tomorrow, 7 p.m. in UK. You will hear about the panel discussion with the brothers speaking about the concept of worship. And then Sunday, obviously, it will be the special one around the marriages and matchmaking. So please do watch, and inshallah, we'll see you soon. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. That was just a few updates from last week, as many of you might have been following on things that were happening and being updated during the previous week. So it was quite a quick run through of the things that were happening in last week or so. And I think in essence, quite obviously a degree of news items and different analysis and elements that are creating impact globally are happening in the last few weeks or so, but none more so obviously impactful than the US elections. As many of you might be following the race to election that is now less than 10 days in time now. It's the 3rd of November when the election will be taking place. And for the first time, I think after at least in this campaign, President Barack Obama, the previous president, made an appearance to support Joe Biden. And he appeared at a car rally. So he went into a rally where people gathered around in different cars. And then President Trump actually went into an actual physical rally a bit later as well. And you can see, I think Obama is really keen on pushing the negatives of Donald Trump at the moment. As you can see that he's quite keen on pushing the agenda that Donald Trump has been pushing via Twitter and all the other things in that domain. So yeah, I think with Obama now entering the campaigning trail for Joe Biden, it's going to be interesting last 10 days leading up to the election. Obviously, quite in essence, Obama and Trump go back a lot in history. Donald Trump asked Obama to present his birth certificate, saying he wasn't born in America and he's not an American. He's coming from somewhere else. So there's a lot of history between them. And now that Obama is campaigning, they both are going to be really wrestling pretty much each other in different words, in different campaign rallies and all that. Closer to home, I think obviously the biggest story at the moment is coronavirus. And as many of you might have been following, the second wave that has now started, it's really taking hold in some of the European countries. Russia, Spain, and France have been quite badly impacted. And the cases have crossed over to 1 million cases in France, in Spain, and Russia as well. So France recently has put up nearly half of their population, 46 million people in a night curfew now. So not even is that the allowance given for people to kind of travel after hours or this and that, but from Friday night, after nearly 2/3 of the country population, about 46 million people, after 10 in the night, actually from 9 o'clock till 6 o'clock, it will be a total curfew in Paris and everywhere else. So no one will actually be even allowed to get out of their houses after 9 o'clock in the evening, as the coronavirus cases have been really rising quite highly. And on Friday, more than 40,000 cases in a single day were reported across France. So I think this is one of the reasons why the French country is quite keen on ensuring that people are remaining indoors. People are not going out in any number, and they are really looking forward, because the number of deaths have also started to increase again. 162 people died yesterday in a single 24-hour span. So this is becoming a major challenge for France to tackle. And the way they are looking to do so is to obviously introduce this night-long curfew. Elsewhere in Europe, as you can see, Russia is still in the higher category in the number of new cases coming through. Czech Republic is obviously one of the hotspots. Germany, Portugal, Greece. It seems like it obviously is a recurring issue across a number of different areas. And hence, the French government has obviously announced this proper curfew that is going to be implemented every night. So this again is, in essence, the direction it feels like that we are moving towards in UK as well. There are obviously localized restrictions in UK. London is on tier 2. Some of the areas in Liverpool are in tier 3. And the Prime Minister is pushing really heavily to put Manchester and some of the northern areas in England on the tier 2 category as well, which the local government is pushing quite heavily against, saying that it is going to be disastrous for the businesses. But again, if the cases are going to continue rising up in this manner, then it might become a lot more stricter, and we probably might see a second lockdown across the UK as well. But equally, I think some good news is also coming out in United States. The tablets and the drug remdesivir, as it was given to President Trump to treat his coronavirus, has now been approved by the US authorities as a drug to treat different coronavirus patients as well. So this was, again, something that wasn't so commonly used. It was only accessible, obviously, Donald Trump being the president, he had the best access to healthcare services and the drugs and the pharma system across the United States. But now this has been approved to be used for the wider patients, and the drug authorities and the companies, they will be working across to see if they can provide these as antiviral drugs or anti-inflammatory or any kind of symptoms that come back on the back of coronavirus can be tackled with this one. So there are signs. There's obviously, as many of you might have heard about, the whole vaccine system and the testing phase that is continuing on a number of different levels. There are levels of vaccination testing that is being carried out across the world. The one developed by Oxford University and AstraZeneca is obviously in the trial phase 4 or 3, as it is known, which is known as the challenge trial, where they inject the virus in a healthy body and then administer the vaccine and see the impacts, good or bad, and then obviously report back. So these trials are continuing in Brazil, in Africa, even in Pakistan in some areas I've heard. So we hopefully might see some results coming on the back of it as well. quite recently, one thing obviously many of you might have been following in Pakistan was this massive issue with the arrest of Captain Tayyid Safdar, who was who's obviously the husband of Maryam Nawaz, one of the opposition leaders. So there was a lot of confusion. The Rangers in Pakistan, they took over some of the police forces top command in Sindh. But interestingly, in India, it created a lot of fake news, and it was actually reported by a number of Indian channels that civil war has broken down in Karachi, and police and army are fighting each other, and there have been more than 40 people killed by police of army personnel in Karachi. And this wasn't reported by any fringe or small newspapers, but it was actually reported in India by major newspapers and journalists, including Dr. APR. It was reported by India Today. It was reported by Indian Herald, even with videos, which no one can confirm where they were shot or where they are from. But for a full 24 to 48 hours, every single newspaper in India was reporting that there's a civil war happening in Karachi, where police and army is fighting each other and people are being killed on both sides, which has been quite interesting in that essence, that obviously nothing of that sort was happening in reality. But all the channels in India, newspapers and everyone else, they kept on pushing this news for about 2 days, actually, since the last incidents, that there's a proper civil war happening in Karachi with army and police fighting each other. But again, I think this is going to be quite interesting, the way misinformation is quite a major impact in the current world. Abbas Nasir, who's the ex-editor of Dawn, one of the leading newspapers, English newspapers in Pakistan, obviously tweeted about it, that this is quite a fake news effort being taken up by different media houses in India, which is pushing this narrative of a civil war in Karachi. So again, it goes back to the same point, that information at the moment is quite sketchy at times. So if you access any news story, do look in the background and see what is actually reality and what is all just being reported as fake news. Staying with India, I think one of the interesting things, obviously, in India is about the quality of pollution and the air quality in India. And many of you who might have seen the debate last night between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Donald Trump actually made a reference to the air quality in India, saying that India is a filthy country. And you can imagine a president of a country calling such a big partner in India as a filthy air country wasn't taken so lightly by the Indian government and the Indian people. You can see on your screen Taj Mahal. It's one of the most famous tourist destinations in India. But because of the smog and because of such a bad air quality at the moment, it's pretty much blanketed in pollution in the suburbs of Agra and on the streets of Delhi. And this has been trending on Twitter and some of the major news agencies across the world as well, because again, as I mentioned, Donald Trump last night went on into the debate and said this thing, that I don't want to make the air in the United States as filthy as in India or in China. It's quite interesting the way he was tackling one of their major partners on a global scale. And obviously, the pollution in India is becoming a major concern, not only just for the government, but for the environmentalists, for the people. It is causing a lot of diseases of respiratory systems and everything else in that domain. And it becomes a lot more prominent at the start of the winter season because of the fires in different forests, because of the smog and the slow movement of the air overall. So it creates a lot of issues in that domain. And obviously Donald Trump referenced to it as filthy, unfortunately, in the presidential debate. Closer to India, I think one of the major stories dominating the world, news stories and everywhere, has been the Afghan conflict and the ceasefire and the negotiations that were completed between Taliban and United States and the Afghan forces as well. One of the leading Prime Minister of Afghanistan, one of the leading personalities during the civil war era, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, recently went and met Imran Khan in Islamabad, and they had a detailed discussion about once the United States is going to pull out of Afghanistan, what is the future going to be like? And this is the second meeting in 2 weeks, as you would imagine. Hekmatyar met Imran Khan, met the President of Pakistan and Foreign Minister and everyone else. And before that, Abdullah, who was at one time the president and also the chief executive of Afghanistan, was also meeting Imran Khan this week. And there's a lot of discussion about what is going to happen with Afghanistan once the US forces actually leave by May next year. By May next year, every single international coalition army officer and recruit will be leaving Afghanistan, which actually Donald Trump is pushing that shouldn't be in May, but should be in December this year. He announced yesterday on Twitter that I'm trying to get every single one of US and NATO soldiers back from Afghanistan before Christmas. It can be an election promise, but if it happens, then it's going to be a major, major concern for the people in Afghanistan, because there isn't any strong government as yet, and there are still a number of warring warlords from different areas. The monument you can see on your screen here, this is the monument being built in Afghanistan, in northern Afghanistan, for Mike Spann, and he was the first American person to die in this battle back in 2001. And since then, more than roughly about 3,500 coalition forces people and more than 120,000 Afghans have died in this war. But this is a growing concern. The US forces are quite keen that Taliban stop their fighting and they do not create any more violence, while equally they appreciate that they have to speak to Taliban, and the deal that was signed in Qatar, in Doha, they have to remain abiding by it to ensure that they have something as a safe exit, as it is known, from Afghanistan. But it's all happening. Pakistan is trying with Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, with Abdullah, with Taliban. Americans are trying with different sections. India is working with Ashraf Ghani to see what the future of Afghanistan will be once the coalition forces leave by the end of May, or even earlier, home by Christmas, as you can see. They might actually be just leaving by end of December in that sense as well. And I think on a similar note, obviously remaining on the conflict side, one of the major conflicts at the moment is the conflict in Libya. Since the death of Muammar Gaddafi, there hasn't been any single government in Libya. It has been one government fighting the other fighting the third government, army creating their own government, civilians creating their own government. But finally, after months and months of discussions in Geneva, in Switzerland, they recently have signed up a ceasefire deal by Khalifa Haftar, as he is known, and the UN-backed government in Libya. And Turkey, obviously, Erdogan is quite heavily involved with the government that is operating out of the northern Libyan areas. So they finally signed a ceasefire, and finally they have agreed that they will now stop fighting in different areas, and they will try and come to some form of an agreement on how the future government of Libya might operate. As you can see this map on your screen, these are the number of different areas that are captured by different warlords and the different fighting tribes against each other. General Khalifa Haftar, all the areas in red, they are pretty much held by the Libyan National Army, as it is known by Khalifa Haftar. All the areas in blue are owned by the government supported by United Nations, Erdogan in Turkey and Russia. There are a number of other militias, as you can see. In green, it's been mapped out. There are so many other people who are just saying that we do not believe in Haftar or the government backed by Turkey. We are independent on our own. But more importantly, as you would see, that Libya is the 4th largest oil producer in the world when it was producing properly. And it is such a major resource that whosoever is controlling the oil fields and the oil pipelines, they pretty much control the whole of Libya. And I think that's the key consideration of why so many powers are actually involved in Libya. and it is going to remain quite a significant issue going forward as well, because of its oil production. So again, some good news coming out of it. Seems like different warring tribes are going to come together finally, and they are going to agree to some form of ceasefire, and the fighting will hopefully stop. Quite similarly, I think one of the other things in Middle East, as many of you might be following this quite closely, is the push by Donald Trump across Middle East and African countries to start recognizing Israel. And we know United Arab Emirates announced that they have established their diplomatic ties with Israel. They've accepted the nation of Israel. Bahrain then announced that they've accepted Israel. And now Sudan today also announced that they have established their ties with Israel. They've accepted Israel for the first time since its creation in the last 70 years. And now they will be going back onto the normalization of ties between Sudan and Israel as well. It's quite a change, because Sudan used to be very heavily dominated by the Islamic forces under General Omar Bashir and others. But since the collapse of those governments, Sudan has now firmly gone into this discussion and agreement with Israel that it's going to establish its ties. And more importantly, I think it's obviously brokered by Donald Trump. And one of the things he announced about 30 minutes ago, is that Sudan is now going to be removed from the United States list of state sponsors of terrorism, so that economic aid now can be provided to Sudan by the United States as well. So this is quite a major change in Middle East since Jared Kushner, who's the son-in-law of Donald Trump and his envoy for Middle East and Israel. He's been working quite heavily to get Israel recognized by a number of Arab states. UAE accepted, Bahrain accepted, today Sudan has accepted, and Donald Trump has actually announced that there are 5 more Arab countries who are going to be recognizing Israel quite shortly as well. So this is quite an interesting move. As you can see on the screen, Omar al-Bashir, he was removed from presidency in 2019. He was quite heavily opposed to Israel, but since he's gone, things have changed, and now Sudan obviously is firmly in camp with the people and the countries recognizing Israel. So that's quite a recent move that has come out. Many of the countries have been avoiding it for a while, but things seems to be changing now, and let's see which direction it goes. As it seems to be pretty much the norm now in the Arab countries. Remaining on that side, I think one of the things happening in Lebanon, obviously many of you might be following Lebanon since the massive blast that happened in Beirut back in August, 26th of August. And since then, the government resigned. The prime minister who was there at that time, he resigned on the back of that blast. There was Mustafa Adib, who was nominated by the president of France, actually, to be the next prime minister of Lebanon, but he wasn't able to form government. He was not able to get any members of parliaments on his side. And finally, today it was announced that Saad Hariri, who is the son of the ex-prime minister of Lebanon, Rafiq Hariri, who was killed in a bomb blast in Lebanon, is now going to become the prime minister again. And he was actually the prime minister in last October as well. And then there was this massive wave of protests in Lebanon that people were demanding that Rafiq Hariri's son, Saad Hariri, also resigns, and they wanted a new government. So interestingly, it took a full circle. I think after a full year of Rafiq Hariri, son Saad Hariri, he resigned in last October. New government came in. They resigned after the blast. There was a person who was nominated as a prime minister. He wasn't able to form the government. And now Saad Hariri is back again as a prime minister. And many of you might remember Saad Hariri was actually asked to resign on, some people say, on the pressurization by the Saudi government, who asked him to step down in the interest of the country in the first place. So again, Lebanon is going through quite a challenging scope at the moment, and there's going to be some degree of nuisance and uncertainty for a while. But for now, it looks like that Saad Hariri as he's won about 68 support of about 68 government members, the members in the assembly, out of the 128 or something that they have. So it is going to be that Saad Hariri is now going to be back as the Prime Minister of Lebanon. And I think, again, Lebanon has been quite badly suffering from the blast, but people are trying to make things better. And one of the things that recently have been created is that one of the artists, Hayat Nazir, has actually created a sculpture of a young girl with the Olympic flame in her hand, using the material and the scrap and the rubble from the blast itself. So she took all the rubble, the scrap materials and everything else, and she created a sculpture of a young girl raising her flame on the back of the Lebanese port as well. So it's going to be tough, again, as you would imagine, but hopefully I think with the new government in, they are able to create a certain degree of stability in the country, and then obviously go ahead and create betterment for the people as well. I think one obviously major issue that's impacting Hong Kong and UK quite in a wider sense is that China is coming quite heavily on United Kingdom, who have offered up to 3 million people of Hong Kong as a visa way to come to UK and claim nationality in UK. And the issue with this one is obviously that the people in Hong Kong are quite, in many cases, very high net worth people. Like there are a number of millionaires and billionaires who belong to Hong Kong. And UK, after obviously all the protests that happened in Hong Kong, is quite willing to get these people come to the UK, start investing here, living here, buying properties and this and that. And China is obviously quite heavily against it. So the UK is using a mechanism, what they used to call it as the British National Overseas Passport, BNO passports. It was used to be given to people who were part of British overseas territories, places like Hong Kong or places like the Falkland Islands and everything else. It was only issued in Hong Kong to people who were born before 1997, because as many of you might be aware of it, that Hong Kong was part of Britain, part of UK before 1997. It was handed over to China in 1997. So UK is claiming that all these about 2,300,000 people who already have a BNO passport, the British National Overseas Passport, which can go up to about 2.9 million people who are eligible for it, can claim visa-free entry into UK and start to come here and live in here. But China is opposing quite heavily, because China feels that if this is going to happen, then people are going to take a lot of investment out of Hong Kong. They're going to take a lot of capital money and everything they have in Hong Kong and bring it to UK, which obviously UK is quite keen on after Brexit. Priti Patel, who is the Home Secretary in UK, he's announced that it will be available from January, and it will be a special UK visa category just for the people in Hong Kong who have the British National Overseas Passport. So it is going to be quite interesting. China sees it as meddling within their own territory, but obviously UK is quite keen to open these routes, and we'll see how this goes. So that was quite a brief overview of a few of the things. I know we've been running for over an hour now, so just a few quick updates on things happening, things that are shaping up around the world, and some of the major events in the news and current affairs domain that are impacting our societies, our world, healthcare systems, governments, elections, and everything else in that domain. So inshallah, we'll continue with our transmission tomorrow, 7 p.m. You will hear as the panel discussion or a discussion on the book by Sayyid Maulana Abul Ala Maududi, and they will be discussing about the true meaning of worship and where it stands in reference to the social norms, structure, and fabric of any society, and what it actually means in terms of reality and practice. So inshallah, we hope to see you tomorrow, and till then, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.